UI for displaying the notes is almost done, and the only thing that's missing is the ability to switch between all and only uncompleted notes. Let's implement the switch. Hello, welcome to ResoCoder, where you are getting prepared for real app development so that you will get freelance clients or a job and be confident about the apps you build. So subscribe and hit the bell to join us on our quest for becoming in-demand Flutter developers. So we have, in the previous part, we've built the note cards for the correct note, for the error node, and also for when something goes horribly wrong and we cannot even get any notes into our app from the Firestore database. What's still missing is this uncompleted switch at the top, which is currently implemented only as a simple icon button right over here in the notes overview page, which doesn't do absolutely anything. It has just an onPressed, which is empty method. We actually cannot leave it to be just an icon button because, as you have heard at the beginning, this is going to be a switch. So instead of a button which can be pressed and every single press is identical, we will need to kind of, switch between states, as it says in the name. So because of that, again, the code for handling this kind of a switch UI is going to get quite long. And because of that, we are going to split it into its own file, into its own widget. So let's go to presentation, notes overview, and widgets. And over here, we are going to create a new file, which is going to be called uncompleted switch.dart. And inside of here, we are going to create a stateless widget, which is going to be called uncompleted switch. Now let's import material.dart. And let's get started with building the UI for it. And then we are going to also add the presentation logic into it so that it will actually do something. We'll basically just want to add different events to the note watcher block, because the note watcher block, if you remember, if we go over there, note watcher, this is the thing responsible for getting us the notes from the Firestore database. And as you can see, it has two events, basically watch all started and watch uncompleted started. And this switch, which we are about to build in this part, is going to be responsible for adding these different events to the block, which is going to trigger the appropriate logic in the repository. So with this understood, we can now go ahead and just switch up the simple icon button, which is currently inside notes overview page in the scaffolds app bar as an action, to be our beloved uncompleted switch, which is currently not implemented at all. So let's add it in here, uncompleted switch, and this button will go away from the corner of the app, but that's not an issue because we are going to add it back in just a bit. And by the way, you can always get this code from the link in the video description if you want to go over it at your own pace. So let's go to uncompleted switch.dart back over here. And the first thing which we actually want to add here is the icon, right? We want to, just as we are building this, see some sort of an icon over here. And for now, let's just include the icon, which is from icons.check. And let's do the outline blank, right? Something like that. As you can see, it was immediately added to the corner of the app bar. Of course, we are going to make it switchable. For now, we are just building a simple UI so that we can see something on the screen. And also we will want to be able to tap this icon. So you may be asking, why are we now just using the icon button as we did previously? Because icon buttons can display icons, of course, and they are also tappable by default? Well, the reason why we are going for an icon and then an ink response instead of a simple icon button, the reason why we're doing this is because we will actually want to sort of animate the switching of the icon from this outline icon to the indeterminate checkbox, right? This kind of an animation should be actually animated over a period of time. And because we want to animate this, we cannot just use the regular icon button. Instead, we need to have this icon separately and then switch the widgets up using an animated switcher. We're going to get to that later on. For now, let's just continue the work with our single icon widget. I just wanted to explain why we are not using the icon button. So ink response is kind of cool because it has an on-tap handler. We'll just provide a simple function. For now, it will be a blank function, but immediately, as you can see, we can tap on this and it looks quite nice. And now, just to sort of offset it from the side, let's wrap this ink response inside padding. And we are going to say symmetric. We want to offset it only on the horizontal axis, so horizontal, and it's going to be 16 logical pixels. And as you can see, it's positioned quite nicely in the app bar, and we are good to go, I would say, in this regard, of course. Now, we need to handle all of the other stuff, which is for switching up the icon and then later on also adding the events to the Node Watcher block. So let's first handle switching the icon from the outline to indeterminate. Or how was it? Check indeterminate. Okay, it's indeterminate checkbox. That's the correct name. So we want to handle switching between these two. How can we do that, right? Well, we are going to create a simple local state variable for holding the toggle state, right? The switch can be either toggled on or off, true or false, and we want to keep this state somehow local to the widget, and we will use this Boolean value to switch the toggle on or off, right? So how can we do that? Because we are currently in a stateless widget, which of course cannot hold any widget specific state. What we need to do usually is to switch to a stateful widget, which will create this kind of a boilerplate, another class. It's all messy, and then we are going to create something like Boolean bool toggle state and set it to false and do that. And of course, we could do something like that even in this tutorial, but we are not going to do that. However, it's completely a viable option. But instead of doing this, what we are going to do is simplify our lives a bit and use hooks. Flutter hooks is a package which simplifies stateful widgets, basically. You no longer need to create this kind of a mess, but you can just have it much simpler. You will see. If you don't know about hooks yet, this video will be enough for you to get going. It's not very hard, but if you would like to learn about Flutter hooks in more depth, you can also check out the video from the card in the corner. But without further ado, let's get to implementing a very simple usage of Flutter hooks right now. So Flutter hooks is a package, so because we currently don't have it in our project, we are going to need to add it, right? We are going to add a dependency Flutter hooks, just like that. Currently it's at version 0.12.0, and once it's downloaded, we're gonna be able to come back to our uncompleted switch and change the stateless widget to be a hook widget. Hook widget is very awesome because it allows us to, instead of defining fields like bool toggle state inside the state class like this, we are going to be able to instead use a function called useState, false. This comes from hooks. And we're gonna be able to put the result of calling this function, the return type, which is, by the way, a value notifier, over to a simple final variable toggle state. Okay, so it sort of kind of resembles what we had in the stateful widget, a variable which holds false, right? It's a Boolean, but it's not a Boolean directly. This toggle state is instead a value notifier which holds bool. So we have this kind of a wrapper type, and value notifier is something like a change notifier with only a single value. If we go and take a look at what a value notifier is, well, it's basically a very simple change notifier, as I've said, which has a single value, and whenever you set a value, it calls notify listeners right off the bat. So as you may know already, whenever you call notify listeners on a change notifier, what it does, obviously, is it notifies the listeners. So what this means is that whenever we set a value on our toggle state, the listeners will be notified. And in the case of Flutter hooks and the hook widget, what this means is that the whole widget will be rebuilt, as we would kind of expect. So we no longer need to call the setState method as you may be used to from stateful widgets, right? Something like that. We will no longer need to call this. It's enough to set a value on the toggle state to, for example, change it to true, and the hook widget will be rebuilt automatically. Okay? So basically, all we need to do is go into the onTap function and say that toggle state dot value, right? And we want to reassign a new value here, which is going to be the negated Boolean of toggle state, which was there previously. So toggle state dot value is equal to not toggle state dot value. Okay, basically, if it was true, it's gonna be false. If it was false, it's gonna be true. And this, as I've mentioned previously, is also going to trigger the rebuild of the widget, which is nice to know. So currently we are switching the values of the toggle state. Actually, we can see it in the console when I print it out. So toggle state dot value, and open up the console. Whoops. This kind of didn't work, right? Well, we shall see what went wrong. I'm not entirely sure. Probably we will just need to, I think it's safe to say that we just need to hot restart the app. Let's try that. That should work. We just probably need to get Flutter hooks going because we have added it as a new library. And sure, now it works. And you can see that we are switching between true and false here, which is good to see. We also need to take this value and change the UI based on it accordingly. So as I have outlined at the beginning of this episode, we are going to use a very nifty widget, which is called Animated Switcher. Why is that? Well, we could technically just do some crude animation like this. So we could just go into the icon and say toggle state dot value and ternary operator, If it's true, we want to show the outline, right? Because we basically want to show only the uncompleted nodes. So that would be icons.checkbox outline blank. And otherwise, we want to show the indeterminate checkbox because we want to show both uncompleted and completed nodes. So we could do something like that, a crude animation. As you can see, it works. You can see that the icon is definitely being switched. Now it's blank, now it's indeterminate. So this kind of works, but the animation is not looking great. If we want to add some sort of a duration and also some sort of a transition, some curve to the animation, for example, we want to scale the icon down as it's animating, and then it's going to also grow larger as the animation finishes. And apparently I have probably gotten some sort of a Russian accent, but hey, gotta embrace my Slavic origins, I guess. But anyway, that's why we are going to use the animated switcher. So let's scratch this switching inside the icon for now. Let's just leave in the outline box blank, and let's wrap this icon in a new widget, which is called animated switcher. Animated switcher takes in a child, that's correct, but it also takes in a few other things. The first one will be duration of the animation. We're gonna wanna set it to be 100 milliseconds. So milliseconds 100, and also let's make this constant to improve performance perhaps a bit. And then also another property of the animated switcher which we want to use is the transitions builder or transition builder, which is simply a function giving us a child and an animation. Child is of course our icon over here because we have defined it as a child, and we're going to use the animation to drive a transition so that we have something moving on the screen nicely. We are going to use the scale transition this time. And scale transition is simply a widget which is going to provide us scaling of the child of this scale transition. So the child should be simply child, which in our case is the icon. And the scale of the scale transition will be driven by the animation, which is being passed in by the animated switcher. We do not need to touch the animation ourselves. It's all handled for us nicely, which is the good thing about animated switcher. Okay, so now there is some sort of an animation going on, but we have gotten rid of the switching of the icons. So we will again want to use the value of the toggle state dot value and perform a ternary operator check. So if the toggle state is true, which means we want to show only uncompleted icons, then we are going to show an icon checkbox outline blank. However, if the value of the toggle state is false, which means we want to show all, so that means both uncompleted and completed nodes, then we'll want to show icons indeterminate checkbox. Awesome. And with something like that, if I scroll back into the view so that you can see everything properly, now something like this happens. The issue is though that you cannot see any sort of an animation. There is no scaling, there is no duration being applied. It just all switches as it did before we even had this kind of an animated switcher in place. So why is that? Well, it turns out that Flutter regards these two quite different icons to be completely identical. It does not know that we have changed from a checkbox outline to an indeterminate checkbox icon. It just thinks that they are the same icons, and therefore we don't see any kind of an animation happening, because I'm told that the animated switcher decides when to play the animation based on if the previous value of the child is the same as the current value of the child. If you think about it, it kind of makes sense. We have just provided a duration, a transition builder, so these two properties have no way of knowing when to actually animate. They just describe how the animation should be performed, but they have no way of triggering the animation, these two properties. Then we have the child property, and then basically there are no other properties to work with. So the only way the animated switcher can register that it should start animating, it should start changing something, is by checking the value of the child, if it's equal to the previous one or not. And the way of how we can sort of tell Flutter that a widget has been changed, if it doesn't register it by itself, is by providing a key. Keys are awesome for many reasons. One of them is easy testing, and another reason is precisely instances like this, where you need to indicate that a widget has been changed even though its type is still the same. So we're going to say key and provide some sort of a constant key with the simple string being the value here. Let's say outline for the first one, and then a different key will be provided for the indeterminate. So key with the value, let's say indeterminate, of course. Okay, now when it's looking something like this, now when we press on this switch, you are able to see that it animates nicely. We can see the scaling, and also it has some sort of a duration. If I change the duration to 1 second, just so that we can see it more clearly, as you can see, it definitely works. The scaling is happening, which is good to know, right? So with this done, we have implemented fully the visual UI part of this uncompleted switch, which is good, but now we also need to make it do something useful, and that is add an event to the node watcher block. So the way we are going to do this is just call the node watcher block.add method. We can get the block from the context of the uncompleted switch, because inside node overview page, we are indeed providing the node watcher block. This means it's available also in the uncompleted switch. So we can use the block provider, definitely, but we can also use the context. If I could write context block extension, just make sure that Flutter block is imported into the file in order to use the extension. And we want to get the node watcher block. Whoops. And on it, we want to add an event. And we want to decide on the kind of an event we want to add, again, based on the toggle states value. So we are going to say toggle state value and a ternary operator. If it's true, we want to add the watch uncompleted started event, because we want to add or watch only the uncompleted nodes. So let's say node watcher event, watch uncompleted started, and make it a constant. Cool. Otherwise, we want to add the other event, which is watch all started. Cool. I know that the kind of events we are passing around, and also the way that this toggle states value means true for seeing only the uncompleted things and false for seeing both uncompleted and completed. This can be kind of confusing, I know. Maybe I have just confused you even more by saying that. But the reason for this confusion, in my opinion, is that the switch is not called completed switch like this, but it's instead uncompleted switch. So we are immediately sort of dealing with double negatives, and it's just a mess. But that's what we get for having an uncompleted switch in the app. But anyway, now that we have done that, we can switch between different states of the uncompleted switch, and it does not do absolutely anything. The reason for it is that the current node, the one node which we have in the app, does always contain one uncompleted to do. I'm going to come into the Firebase console, change this hey to do to be completed to, and then we should actually see some UI changes happening when we press the switch. So I'll be right back. Here we go. The hey to do is also completed. And now when we switch the uncompleted switch, we can see that the nodes are disappearing and appearing, which is what we actually wanted to see. So if you liked this video and you don't want to miss more tutorials like this from Flutter, from this series, and also from all kinds of libraries and doing all kinds of things in the Flutter framework, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Also join notification squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you grow your Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder I am determined to provide you with the best tutorials and resources so that you will become an in-demand Flutter developer. And if you are serious about becoming a great Flutter developer who can build real apps for clients or at a job, go to flutter.education. A link is also in the video description, by the way, to get the top curated Flutter news and resources aimed at improving your app development career. Over there, you can also subscribe to my mailing list to get the best Flutter resources delivered weekly right into your inbox. If this video helped you, give it a like and also share it with other developers who are surely going to find it beneficial too. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and see you in the next video.